Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to another service with After His Heart Ministries. I have a question for you. My question is, what is a pill, a monkey, and a photon have in common? So this is a very interesting question, right? What does a pill, a monkey, and a photon have in common? The answer is that every one of those are involved in an experiment that has resulted in a proof that humans basically have some sort of connection, energy, lack of better words, control or authority over matter, over reality, over light. Now, there's a couple things I need to get into here, and invariably, we're obviously going to step into mysticism. That's a given, right? We start to get into weirdness like this, but truth be told is all three of these things are actually legitimate, reproduced laboratory experiments that fit the secular scientific model that then would be believable for, say, a scientist, okay? So first and foremost, it is very important for you to understand what you think you understand about quantum mechanics, you don't. What you think you understand about energy and waves and particles, you don't. And what you think you understand about the Bible when it comes to that, you don't. So short version is the best way I could put this to you is that we have scientific proof that energy can be neither destroyed nor can it be created. That means that it is omnipresent. It's always present, and it always exists. Now, we've done a number of funky things to explain the energy that we don't understand because there's an empty space where energy should exist. For example, we'll say dark energy, or we'll say some other thing. However, what's really important for you to understand is how you interact with energy and vice versa, how energy interacts with you. So there's a number of things that are important here. The first one that you need to understand is that in general, when we are working with a system of rules or whatever, when it comes to the mystic, when it comes to mysticism, when it comes to the idea that the only thing that exists is you and the light of the creator, then we need to understand dynamics. Now, in times past, I have done specific things to indicate that things are not linear, but they are cyclical, okay? And furthermore, I've done things to show you the ratios and the hard evidence and proof of flow dynamics. So the way that when you think about this is dynamic means that it's always moving, and non-dynamic or static means that it is stuck where it's at, okay? So when we think about always moving, we instantaneously want to assign direction, or we want to assign opposites. For example, if I say something's always moving, you may think that it's going up and down. You may think that it's going side to side. You may think that it's going forward and backward. You may think that it's going some diagonal way, but the point is that you assign direction to it. Well, there's a reason for that, because we are linear in our processes because of the way in which we interact with our environment. For example, there's nothing at this point in time that exists in technology that gives you an ability to cyclically travel to work. Now, let me illustrate for you what I mean. Let's jump over to the whiteboard and take a look at this. And let's go ahead and come over here, and I'm just going to draw a simple circle, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to get a different color that contrasts, and I'm going to put a color right here. I'm just going to put a little dot, Okay. Now this little dot indicates the origin point. Okay. That origin point is basically the point where everything starts. And let's just say for the sake of the way we think about things, because when we think about things, we think clockwise, right? We think clockwise. And so when we're doing that, what we want to do then is kind of give our brains a little bit of a rest and not go counterclockwise, because of course counterclockwise is counter to our way of thinking because of how the clock moves. So if the clock was to move counterclockwise, we would not accept time as we understand it. Okay. So in terms of time, it is very important for you to think about this as in this is going to be the most natural movement that we can accept. Okay. So the principle is this idea of moving clockwise around a clock, and we have the origin point. Now, the way that you want to think about this is the way that this would be laid out. So if we were to take and cut, say, a segment right here in the circle, okay, and right here in the circle, and we just wouldn't have this area right here. If we were to take and stretch this point and this point out, what we would have is we would have a linear line if it was stretched out, the length of the circle between those two segments. And just to illustrate that, we can go ahead and put our segments in there. So in our brains and in our minds, we have origin. Actually, you know what? Let's go ahead and stay consistent here. We have origin, right? And then we have destination. Okay. So the way that I want you to think about this is that if we were to travel around the circle to the other side in terms of origin and destination, let's say that we were going to start right here and not necessarily at our purple origin point, but we're going to start at that first segment and we're going to end at this segment. What I want you to see is that we think that it works like this. We think that we move along this line like this, and we can do this, right? We can go and we can mark out times in history, timelines, right? Let's say that we talk about like the origin of time. If we're using the Bible, we would say like Adam here, right? And somewhere in here we'd have the flood or Noah, right? And then somewhere in here we have Abraham, right? And maybe somewhere over here we'd have David, right? And then maybe Yeshua. But you get my point. We see this as linear, okay? So the way that I want you to understand this is when we're seeing this as linear, we don't think about it in a quantum way, okay? Now, the reason why that is important is because our perception is linear because we move in a linear fashion. You can't move if you're moving in a specific direction unless you change or course correct. Unless you change your direction or course correct, you actually are always going to be moving in that same direction. It's not like you can move in two directions at once. However, in quantum understanding, and if we had some sort of device to make this happen, what we could actually do is be at this origin at two different times. Okay. And so the way that I would want you to think about it is if we were to draw another circle and we were to say that the segment here is both origin and destination, then we would have what? We would have gone all the way around the circle without ever traveling. Okay? So here's how I want you to think about it in terms of reality. When we are working with the principle of origin and destination, one of the things that I want you to think about is the concept of I want you to think about the concept of not moving. Okay. So how you got to think about this is that when you think about origin and destination as a linear process, say like for example, you're going to travel to work, right? And so you have a length or a distance. That's not quantum. Okay. Quantum would be that you actually are at work at the same time that you are at home. And somehow you were accomplishing that thing at work and also being at home. You say, well, how is that possible? Because in quantum, time is different. Now, there's a few reasons why we need to get into this thought process, but the thing I want you to understand is that when we're working with these three things, which is what? A photon, a pill, and a monkey, then we kind of have to accept that these things are actually establishing some proofs about the universe. Well, of course, you know that the original experiment in quantum mechanics that kind of brought it all about, there was a number of things that brought it about, but there was this idea of what we would call superposition, and there was this idea of basically there's this idea behind what we call the double slit experiment. And so really quick, I will establish some fast diagramming of the double slit experiment so that you can really kind of get your mind wrapped around it. Okay. So we're just going to come over here and um, let's get back into this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take, and let's say that we take, I'm thinking that we're going to go ahead and do our same color scheme here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put this little pebble in this pool of water. Okay. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to illustrate really quick how waves work. So let's say that let's just go ahead and use our orange again because of that contrasting color option we have. Okay. And so the pebble starts to produce this wave. And let's say that we ignore this back part. In fact, let's just put a boundary there and ignore it. Okay. We're just going to ignore this part right here. And so the pebbles dropped in the water, and now all of a sudden these waves start to occur. Now, the principle is that if those waves were to pass through a boundary, they would reconcile themselves on the other side. I'm going to show you what I mean. So the principle is that then we would create another boundary, which I'm just going to draw like this. Okay. And then I'm going to continue to illustrate these waves really quick. So these waves continue to come this direction, right? And as they hit this spot right here, what happens is they start to do this again. Okay. And so a wave will pass through right here, but because it's a wave, it will spread out again. Now, what's interesting about this, and the reason for this is because what's actually happening is there's actually these peaks, okay? So whereas we're perceiving it from this perspective, let me go ahead, I'm going to reduce this pen a little bit. We're going to go ahead and come out here with some blue. When we're looking at it from this perspective right here, right, then we are seeing only the waves from the side like this. Okay, so that's all we would see. So really what we would see is, if I was to illustrate this better, and let me just go ahead and do that really quick here. Really what we would see here is we would see a wave, right, and a peak, and then a boundary, right, basically showing where it passes through this boundary. And we would not be able to see behind this boundary, but then we would see some sort of wave and peak again, okay, like this. Okay. And so the reason why this is important is because as it passes through this thing right here, you can't see that peak in that wave, right? However, there's a peak there. And so that's why when it gets on the other side, it continues to propagate as a wave. Now, the reason why this is so important is because what this illustrates is that as a wave passes through a boundary or passes through a narrow a narrow gate or a narrow section of a boundary, we are going to see the wave manifest again on the other side. Now, that's all fine and dandy, but what would happen if we had two pebbles and two openings? So let's just illustrate our opening real quick. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and create here a back wall. And I think what the back wall is going to be is this color right here. And I'm just going to have this back wall here. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and say that we're going to create a bottom boundary so that our wave doesn't go the opposite direction. And then in between, we're just going to have a couple of openings. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drop in two rocks into our system. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use two different colors to draw the patterns. And so from the one pattern, we will go ahead and have, let's do a yellow pattern. Okay. And so I'll just start to draw this pattern. And actually, I'm going to probably get to about right here. And then I'm going to go ahead and draw this other pattern, and then we'll reconcile them. Okay. So then the second one, let's use blue to illustrate this second pattern. Okay. So before that ripple goes any further, you see what's about to happen. Now, I can't interlace these with this two-dimensional drawing option, but we're going to go ahead and we'll draw the yellow first. And by the way, this is actually really fun to draw on a piece of paper. It's really pretty. So, I mean, if you wanted to try, you know what, let's create one more. Actually, let's not do that. Okay, so then I'm just going to keep going with this out here, even though the boundary doesn't go out that far, just because I don't want to keep redrawing boundaries. Okay, and you'll notice that once it reaches here, it kind of gets broken up. But as it passes through here, it passes through as just that single piece, but we know it's also a wave. Now let's illustrate the blue, right? Now, there's a reason behind what I'm showing you here. I promise you, you will not regret sticking with me. You will want to watch this all the way through. Even if you know the double slit experiment by heart, you will appreciate what I'm about to show. Okay, so for those of you who don't know the double slit experiment, you don't know this, but when we go to the other side, we have something very interesting happen, and that is that there will be some interference patterns, and what those interference patterns will do is create secondary ripples. We won't get completely into that, but here's how the principle will work. So let's go ahead and let's do the yellow first. So the yellow's coming through, coming through, coming through, coming through, okay? And then we have the blue coming through, coming through, coming through, coming through, okay? Now, what you don't know is that when these patterns begin to interfere with each other, they will begin to move in the direction that they're interfered with. So the best way I could put you that is like this, which would basically be that there will be a whole lot of these interference patterns that are going to be moving straight, but to really illustrate that, I need to crisscross them so we can see where they're moving straight at. Okay, so we'll just continue to kind of interlace these. We can't do it very well because of the okay, and then we have what? We have connection here, 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 and here. Let's just leave it at that. We could keep going because it does go on forever, truly, and it just gets the wavelength gets wider as you go out, but that's a whole nother story. And then let's do a couple more connections here. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to illustrate this on the back of this thing as to how these are actually hitting, okay? And so what we have here is we have dot, 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 okay? And then on the other side, we have dot, dot, oops. Don't know why that didn't change. Okay, we have dot, 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 and then dot, dot, dot. And let's just put a couple more dots here. And so what you'll see is that from that, we can basically conclude that there's a spread along that back wall, right? Where the waves actually impact against this back wall. Now, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that happens where it like reflects back this direction, and that's important, but we don't need to discuss it today. Where it comes back like this, anywhere where a curve interacts with a straight line, it returns perpendicular to it, but that's not necessarily relevant here. What's relevant here is that you notice the pattern on that back wall, okay? So the way that I want you to think about this is that this is what we would call wave, okay? And I'm actually going to highlight this, and I'm gonna scoot it over because we need the other side of the screen. Over here, we'll put it over here. Now, we're going to create the same exact system, but we're going to fire it differently. So on the other hand, we have this idea of this wave pattern on the back wall, right? And now I'm going to tell you what's important here. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and circle it. What's important here is actually this pattern. As a result of dropping the two pebbles in the bottom and then having the waves pass through the small slits, how they impact the back wall is a wave, okay? But then on the other side, what we're going to do is we're going to create the same boundary system, okay? And then what we're going to do, let's see, we need the blue wall, right? We need this blue wall. And then what we're going to do, though, is instead we're going to get, we're going to set up a paintball gun, okay? We're going to put a paintball gun right here. And let's not use that color. We use that color for the boundary, so let's use a different color. We're gonna set up a paintball gun. Let's just use that color right there. So we're gonna set up a paintball gun and a paintball gun, and we're gonna fire green. We're gonna fire bright green through the one, and we're gonna fire yellow through the other. Now, well, I don't know what color we'll fire through there. Okay, so the principle is that any type of thing like a lack of aim, depending on how small the slit is, a lack of aim or maybe some air friction or whatever is going to cause some of the paint to gather on the sides here, right? But back here, we will get a very big spread and then a little minor splatter spread back here, right? And let's use a different color. Let's say that we go ahead and use, Yeah, we can actually use red for that part, I think. No, let's not use red. Let's use yellow. Really try and choose my colors here for a reason. Okay, so we got yellow here, right? So it's kind of beaten up against the back wall there, but then it's got this kind of this spread like this, right? Which is very concentrated. So it's very, 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 very concentrated here and then spread out there. Okay, so that is this idea, and we'll just go ahead and shoot a particle through, and then we'll go ahead and on the other side, we will do the same thing again with the green. We'll shoot a particle through. Okay, so that you know that the different colors are passing through. Okay, so on this side, we say that this is how particles work. Okay. Now, what the double slit experiment did is they fired electrons. Okay. So when we're talking about this, this is how, when you think about this, these are going to be electrons. Okay. Now, electrons are very similar to photons in their process. And so what they did is they had this kind of this plate, this metal plate on the back, and this is kind of the spread that they had when they fired the electrons. Well, what was interesting is that's not the pattern they had. Even though that they were firing particle electrons at this back plate, they had this pattern. And what they did is they said, well, wait a minute, we are definitely intentionally firing electrons. We're firing particles at this back panel. Why are we getting a wave spread where we have this spectrum of light against this back wall, right? Instead of these really concentrated patterns. Well, basically what they discovered is it had to do with whether or not they were observing or whether or not they were measuring which, because what they did is they set up a detector right here to detect which slit the electron went through. Now, here's where it gets crazy, and this is important. What they discovered is that an electron actually, when it was detected, went through both gates. And furthermore, when it went through both gates, it created a pattern on the back wall. Furthermore, when it created a pattern on the back wall, it was not a wave pattern. But when they would remove the detector to see which gate the proton, or I mean, sorry, the electron went through, it created a wave pattern on the back wall. So at first they thought, well, this is faulty equipment, or maybe we have some, bias going on here. Let's try to create the experiment a different way. And so they thought, well, what we'll do is we will not observe, but we'll detect. In other words, we won't look at what the detection is. And what was interesting is when they did that, not only could the detector determine which gate the electron went through, but it was a wave pattern spread on the back wall. In other words, when we didn't watch it, it had a wave pattern, but you could detect which thing it was going through. But when you watched it, it would go through as a particle through both gates and create a particle pattern on the back wall. Now, there's a reason why this is important, because this is the part of the photon, the monkey, and the pill. Okay? Now, the reason why we are getting into this and the reason why we're discussing this is because when we think about the rules concerning quantum mechanics, we understand that light knows when it's being watched. Oh, but it gets greater. There was actually somebody who took and said, well, what if we had an animal watch the detection? What would happen then? And interestingly enough, the particles were detected in the gates on the side that they went through, and the wave pattern occurred, which means what? Only humans actually were able to cause the particle spread as if it was a paintball gun. Now that stumped everybody, but that's what created what's called superposition, and that's what created the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is simple. You either know where something is or you know how fast it's going. That's the simplicity of it. So you can't do both. You can't determine location and determine speed, and you can't determine speed and know location. What that created is what we call superposition, and the whole idea is that that photon actually spread against that back wall in multiple locations as long as we did not observe its location. But if we observe its location, then it was definitely superimposed in that location, and you could not see its spread anymore. You could not see its speed against the back wall. So you could determine where it was located, or you could determine how fast it was going. Now, when this comes into principle, this is where we started to figure out things like, for example, nuclear weapons. Okay. But what really is important here is the idea that light knows that it's being watched by humans, okay? Photon light, which means that it is usually the result of a large amount of density creating a frictional resistance that emits light, that emits photons. For example, a tungsten incandescent bulb is a bulb that has heat as a result of resistance passing through it. A very, very small conductive system, very small conduction with a whole lot of current being pushed against it creates friction, which emits light. Okay, whether you have that in a light emitting diode or a tungsten light bulb, you're experiencing the same principle. Photons are being emitted as a result of that. So, first of all, there are two very important things that we need to gather from this. Number one is that we have made the mistake in the past of saying that the word light has to do with photons when it comes to the Bible. Okay? That was a mistake that we made from the beginning. That light was lux, whatever you want to say for your English Latin derived word does not equate to what's actually in the Bible when it says, let there be light. Light is a very poor interpretation. And I'm going to propose to you that by the end of this, you're going to understand why. And it's not going to be the reason you think. It's not going to be because of something else, but it was a very intentional thing that occurred, and I'm going to show you how and why. Now, here's the next piece of this puzzle, okay? So we have, what does a photon have in common with a monkey that is in common with a pill, okay? So let's move to the pill. So the next concept in this is what we call the placebo effect. Here's the simplicity of it. And where this has become extremely important is in epidemial studies of inoculation. Okay, so epidemiology is the study of the spread of disease, but also it's the study of the inoculation for population. Okay, in other words, can we create something that will affect the entire population and we would actually prevent that disease from occurring anymore? So we have an inoculation. So what is the idea behind inoculation? Is to trick the immune system into what? Reacting to the disease quicker, and therefore building up a system of information so that if that disease comes back into the body, it already has a list of things to match up to it to kill it, right? Okay. So the reason why this is so important comes back to our idea of static versus dynamic, where we have moving versus sitting still. Okay. So the whole idea here comes from the system of how your body works. Remember, I said that dynamic is moving, static is holding still. your body is in a constant state of flux. Okay. Now, remember when I was talking earlier on the board about the circle and the idea that you could be in you can be in multiple positions at once, is because of the quantum principle, right? Because of the idea that you can either do speed or you can do location. But what's more is the fact that the science, let's just call it science at large, that is fully contained within the quantum theory. Now, there are scientists who reject quantum, right? They reject the system of quantum mechanics because of how dangerously close it's coming to mysticism. They want to reject the principle that Yahweh is at the core of everything, okay? And it comes dangerously close to intelligent design. It comes dangerously close to not having control, and we're going to get into that too. Okay, so now the principle is that we have this drug, and let's say that we have this disease. For all intents and purposes, it's incurable. And so what they do is they figure out all the proteins and DNA and information around the disease. They study it. They look at its DNA. They look at its strengths, its weaknesses, and all that. And of course, what are we going to do? We're going to exploit their weaknesses, and we're going to somehow try to mitigate its strengths through DNA manipulation and through some sort of medicinal process. Now, that medicinal process has to go through clinical trials because a lot of times those are poisons to the body. And so as a result of that, when we go through clinical trials, what do we got to do? We got to prove that it's actually worth it, right? Let's say that we have 1,000 people and 4 die. That's an acceptable loss when it comes to this pill, as long as it actually works. Well, how do we test that? We do a double-blind experiment in which we have a group of people who are going to receive the drug and a group of people who are not going to receive the drug, and they're both going to be told that it will help them. So what was happening is as they started doing these established drug trials, they were finding out some very difficult things. Now, I'm going to quote a company, and I'm not doing that in order to throw them under the bus. I'm actually doing that because I'm pretty sure they're the first ones. So remember, we're talking about an incurable disease. Well, GlaxoSmithKline, back in, I believe it was about 2014, 2015, actually released a preliminary study and proof that shot their stock through the roof that they had discovered an oncological drug. In other words, they had found a drug that works to help reduce cancer. Okay. Now, I could tell you the dangers of publishing something like this. And like I said, I think that's the correct company. You need to fact check me. But they published this paper, right? And this paper shoots their stock through the roof. And then what happens? They start clinical trials. They've been approved for clinical trials. So what happens? They bring in cancer patients. One set of cancer patients has the pill, the legit pill. One set of cancer patients does not. What's the result, and what is the actual system that is occurring here? Well, interestingly enough, placebo sugar pill people had results similar to the oncological drug people. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that they came up with a cure for cancer or anything like that. I'm saying that the people who were taking the sugar pill had the same effect in such a large percentage that they weren't sure that the drug could actually work. Now, I'm not quite sure what the outcome was with that, because obviously we still don't necessarily have a cure for cancer. But what is intriguing and what is important about this information is the concept that there is actually something going on with these people who were what? Who were gaining traction on their cancer, the same as the people who were gaining traction on their cancer in the group who was receiving the pill, which meant what? either that pill was ineffective, the sugar pill has some compound in it that works that way, and what they discovered is there's okay. So now the next principle that we need to get in place is the principle that these people were told that it would work. They were told they were taking the drug. Now, on the application, it flat out says you might be taking the sugar pill, you might be taking the drug. But if you take the drug, which we don't know which one you're going to be taking, but if you take the drug, then you actually will, it will improve. Okay. So what's interesting is the people who were taking the sugar pill actually were getting better, even though that they were just taking sugar. They were just taking a pill that was just crushed sugar, put in pill form, and they were ingesting it, which would not in any way affect the body. Okay, so next is the monkeys, right? So we have a pill, we have a photon, and now we're going to talk about monkeys. Well, it's interesting because the pill and the photon actually only have their commonality in that a human believed that there was going to be some sort of cure or some sort of change and effect in their body, even though they were ingesting nothing. And then we've concluded that light knows when it's being watched by a human. But what you don't know is the later experiments produced something even more frustrating for the scientists, and that was they figured out that the detector is made of the same particles of the rest of the universe, and therefore the detector itself was actually wrong or off or something was wrong. So they tried different detectors. And what they finally figured out is that the detector was able to know what the actual losing me there, huh? The detector was able to know what the actual effect was going to be beforehand. Okay, I'm gonna fix this technique. Okay, so we will definitely have to edit that out later on. We're having this major storm here, so I'm not quite sure how it's interfering with the broadcast, or with my equipment for that matter. Okay, so the principle is that these detectors actually were made of the same stuff. And so what they figured out is that these detectors actually were not, these detectors were biased to the expectation of the scientist, and they documented that. Now, there's a few things that are very important about that, because remember how the people were having the expectation that the drug was going to help them, even though that they were receiving the placebo or the sugar pill. Remember, over here, we have the idea that the detector is looking at the expectation of the scientists. A combining of those two, what makes them a connection? What do they have in common? That they are about the expectation of the they're connected. They have the expectation, or I'm sorry, they are the result of the expectation of the human being believing that that's going to occur. Now, you've heard this all before, right? I've brought this up before. but I want to show you this in a very different way. Okay, so now what do we have? We have monkeys, right? What does a monkey have in common with a placebo pill or a pill and a photon or a photon detector and its scientist? Well, the way this works is that basically there was an island, and on this island were these monkeys. And these monkeys were set to probably not survive because no vegetation could really actually be edible and therefore usable by the monkeys on this island. They weren't sure how these monkeys got to the island. They knew they probably couldn't displace them. And so what they decided to do is interfere a little bit with nature. And you know what happens every time man interferes with nature, something crazy happens. Well, here's the crazy. So they decided that the best thing that could grow in this very bad soil was sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are very resilient. They have an ability to grow in places that you would be shocked that they grow. In fact, I've actually had sweet potatoes sprout roots in my refrigerator because they were in there too long. All right, so the premise is that they have this sweet potatoes, and so they start growing them, and of course the monkeys come out and they're like, "Oh yeah, this is great. Let's start eating them." And they go to eat them, and they've got that sand grit in them, and therefore when they're trying to chew them, of course they're like, "Okay, this is hurting my teeth. I don't want to do this," and they just throw it away. Well, over time there was a number of different thoughts or ideas by the scientists that they wanted to try. And one day while they were trying to figure things out, this young female monkey comes out and picks one of the sweet potatoes and runs off with it. Well, after a couple of days of her doing this, they decided that they would watch her because obviously if she was coming back for more and the other monkeys weren't, something was different, and scientists love anomalies. And so, boom, they go and they follow the monkey and find that she's actually taking the sweet potatoes to the stream in Washington. What was interesting is they watched her for like a week or so, and then eventually the other monkeys started seeing her go and get the sweet potatoes and decided to follow her because for some reason she's got a fatter belly than the rest of them, right? So then they go over and they watch her wash. Well, what's interesting is they went and they watched her wash the sweet potatoes, and they washed them and put them in there. Well, and they washed them and they put them aside, and they ate them, and there was no grit in their teeth. And so they started the process of taking the sweet potatoes to the stream and washing them. Now, that's no shock, right? Monkeys are very smart. We've got plenty of experiments from behavioral scientists to indicate that they're very close to humans. Their brains activate the same kind of ideas and whatnot. However, and this is very interesting, that wasn't the big deal. What was the big deal is when the scientists decided to publish the paper. As soon as they published the paper, they were contacted by scientists around the world that said, "You're not going to believe this, but we have the same conclusions in our study, and these monkeys are now washing their fruit, and they weren't before." And what they figured out is that when they checked their logs and they checked their photos and they checked all their information, it was happening at all the same time around the world. Well, this is what we call the corporate collective conscience, okay? Now, what does it have in common with the placebo and with the and with the photon? Well, what scientists have discovered as a result of a number of things, which includes but not limited to splitting an electron using a special device and sending it off in different directions, sending the two pieces off in different directions, they found out that there was a communication between this piece of the electron and this piece of electron in such a way that if this piece of the electron was detected spinning downward, this piece of the electron was detected spinning upward. In fact, for all intents and purposes, it was the mate of the two. Okay. Now, getting back to this concept of our bodies being a balance and homeostasis in a dynamic state, we know that you couldn't just take that same pill every time and it have the same effect. Everybody's different, and there's going to be some sort of side effect. There's going to be some sort of benefit to taking the medicine. And that was true enough to say that we can or we cannot put it on the market. Now, there's a couple things that are really important here, because when we start to get into the thought process that these two knew when they were up and down, we have homeostasis. We have the connection between what is supposed to be up and what is supposed to be down. And if they were at an angle, the other one was at the opposite angle. They were always 180 degrees to each other. Now, why that's so important is when we start to get into the rest of this story, because what they figured out is that no matter how far apart, and we're talking about this experiment was stretched out over miles, the spin was always the opposite. And it was always detected that way. So if it was detected as down here, it was detected as up here. So what they actually began to figure out is that this superposition concept was that there were more than one instance of the electron present at different times. There was a communication between the two of them. Now, where this becomes important is when we think about the fact that if it can happen with monkeys, and by the way, it can happen for rats too. In fact, one of the things they have going on with rats is they will come up with a rat poison, and they have an agreement between the other cities of the world that have the most rats. So New York has the most rats, Dubai has the most rats, etc. And so what they do is they say, okay, this city has these rats. So what we're going to do is we're going to collaborate, and we're going to give each other information about our formulas so that basically you can have the same formula I have to kill these rats. Well, what was happening is, first of all, the New York rats, for whatever reason, would immediately, within hours, adapt to a poison. So the first set of rats would start dying. The second set would just get sick. The third set would have no problem, and they'd have to alter the formula again. Now, they figured out how to tweak the formula fast enough that they can actually distribute the poison fast enough with a new compound. But they're sharing it with their people in Dubai. But what was interesting is their people in Dubai would get it far enough into the future that the rats that were there in Dubai would actually already know the formula, and they would have already adapted. And so Dubai would have to tweak their formula really quick and send that back to New York. But by the time New York got it, these rats had already adapted. Corporate collective conscience. Okay? All right. I want you to know something, and this is important. All of this has to do with instruction from God to the universe for Adam and his sons. Okay? So, first and foremost, one of the things that we need to get into is the principle of dominion. As I say that, there's something you need to know. This will be the last message I preach on dominion, and I'll explain to you why. When we get into this, you need to know that there's nothing else you need to know after this about dominion. You just need to live it. You just need to become it. You just need to realize what it is. Because if there's anything I understand about the mistake that we've made with Christianity, remember last week I jumped in the middle of total depravity and told you that maybe it wasn't last week, maybe it was the week before, but I told you, you're not evil. God doesn't make junk. He didn't invent a bunch of people to go to hell. Okay? He didn't do that. And Adam's sin does not change the dynamic of that reality. Okay? Now, what's important for you to know, though, is that the universe, according to Paul, according to Genesis, according to David, according to a number of other sources within the Tanakh, within the latter writings, even the book of Revelation, say that the universe is currently conspiring on your behalf to be unconditionally obedient to the sons of Adam, or to Adam and his sons. Now you say, why do you say that? I will show you and I will prove this, because we're going to get into the quantum connection between all three. Okay. So here's the first thing you need to understand. The first thing you need to understand is that every system of information is actually connected to every other system of information. Remember, energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed, but it always exists. That is a law of thermodynamics. Furthermore, we understand that within that context, that means that energy has always had information within it, because we understand that information exists. How do we know that? Well, let's see. When we attach things to our body, say we go to the emergency room and they want to know all the different things that are going on with your body, they attach little pads and they say, oh, well, some of that detects electric signal, right? And then they have other things that basically are going to be detecting actual brain waves, like a encephalogram, I believe it's called. But the point is, and this is important, they have been forever using wave energy to affect our lives. Now, I don't mean in a bad way. I mean that as technology has progressed, predicted by Nikola Tesla to begin with, who consequently not only knew the things that I'm talking about, but if you go read some of his experiments, he got into some realms that you're not ready for. He got into some information you're not ready for. So here's the part, and I'm not trying to insult you here, because I'm not ready for it either. You need to know that, okay? But the premise is that inside of that whole system of information that I'm talking about, that's riding on these carrier signals, you have your cell phone, you have your computers, you have your internet, you have wireless broadband, okay? But what you need to realize is that Solomon, who was the wisest man in all the world, and such as never was, so shall never be again. In other words, no man, no matter what their name was not as wise as Solomon. Because this is just something that Yahweh decided to grant to him because of the desire of his heart. He became a master at this. And I can tell you, he may have known about cellular technology and possibly may have experimented with it, but he didn't need it. And he knew he didn't need it. And that's what we're going to get into today. Now, here's the part that's important. Remember, I said I will probably not preach another message about this ever again. You never say never, but let's just say, for the sake of this argument, that you understand that the instructions of dominion are the result of the concept that the sons of Adam and Adam himself are a very special being. Remember, I've taught you, and I believe it was in the Elohim teaching, it might have been in the world teaching a little bit, and it was definitely in the cycles teaching, that you exist because you are important. In other words, the only reason you exist is because you're an important part of the process that the intensification of all power in the universe has initiated. And furthermore, you need to understand that you are that process. Not that he's using you for that process, but you yourself as an existence are a process of his work being done. That's where we get into the Elohim teaching, right? Where we in times past have talked about how Yeshua called us gods. And furthermore, in the Psalms, we are called gods. But that word Elohim actually means powers or energies. And when you grasp that, you grasp everything you need to understand about what I'm talking about. But again, that's teachings we've already been in. This is the final sealing of this information. And the way that it's going to work, I'm going to show you this, is you're going to understand that there is a thread that is connected throughout time to your past self and your present self and your future self and all the selves in between when they're existing in that moment. And furthermore, there is information within your DNA being instructed and recorded for the next generation of your offspring that will receive information from all those selves at once. And so the future self so let's say that you're a young person in college right now and you have not yet had a relationship in which you have produced offspring. The future self that produced offspring already has all the information from the past and all the information from the future that you're now going to encode upon the DNA. So now you understand where this could get really, really important about what is encoded there. And furthermore, how your past is affecting your future and how your future could invariably affect your present. So there's a number of things that we need to get into here, but you need to understand that what the placebo effect, which is the pill, the double slit experiment, which is the photon, and the monkey, which is the island of the monkeys and the rats, all have in common is that quantum connection. Every one of them. Why? Because how does the detector know what the observer wants to actually happen? It actually communicates with the particle of itself in the future that has already been affected. And so then it adjusts. So the way that I want you to think about this is that in that moment that the electron is passing through the gate, it's actually connected with the electron that already passed through and has seen what the expectation of the observer was, which means we can't control the present electron because it's getting information from the future electron. This is legit quantum science. You can go look this up. And so how does that then affect our electrons? Because we are made up of molecules. We are made up of cells that are made up of all that information I just talked about. So now we go and we eat a sugar pill and expect a disease to reduce, and it does. Why? Because the disease has looked into the future and seen where it does not have a welcome mat anymore. But what you need to understand is the reason why that disease exists in the first place is because somewhere in the future, we have it as a result of the now where we desired it and you don't even know that you desired it. In fact, what's crazy about it is that you will think about what might happen to you as you ingest something. You could be ingesting a piece of meat and think in your mind, wow, this is a little undercooked. I might get sick. And what's crazy is the future self is already sick and sends information back to your body and boom, you get sick. Now, I know this sounds insane, but where this is really going to affect you is when we start to get into the corporate collective conscience and what this message is actually really about. So to illustrate that, we need to jump back to the board. And of course, with all of the technical problems we're having, we're just going to go ahead and we will come back over here and let's see if we can illustrate this. So the first thing I want to do is draw a timeline. And I want you to remember that a timeline is actually an illusion. In fact, let's actually draw a timeline that we all know really well, okay? What is that timeline we know really well? It's our three dots, okay? It's our three dots. So in principle, we already know what's going to be going up here, right? Everybody who has seen this channel before or who has listened to me before know I'm about to write Passover here. And then know that I'm going to write Pentecost here. And know that I'm going to write Tabernacles here. And we know that the last day of Tabernacles and the first day of Passover is something that we call what? The feast day season, right? Even though that it's not really necessarily about feasts in a weird sort of way, it is, and we can get into that, but the principle is that this is the feasts. Now, what else do we know about it? Well, and this is going to be important. What else do we know about it? We know that it is also reaping. This is the harvest season, right? What else do we know about it? We know that it's the season that the flood was in, right? We know that the flood was contained within this system, meaning what? One of the other pieces of this puzzle is judgment. Now, we are not talking about wrath of God pour down on humanity and all of a sudden people's tires are melting because the sun got so hot kind of judgment. What we are talking about is an equal distribution of justice. In other words, a righteous judge distributing information. And I actually don't like how that's looking on the screen, so I'm going to go ahead and get a different color here. And what we'll go ahead and do is just use that same we'll just use that same color here. Sometimes my pens are too dark on the day. All right, there we go. So judgment. Now, here's the part that's interesting. Let's say that you are actually somewhere, say here in the golden calf season. Let's change that color. Let's go this green right here. So you're here in the golden calf season that we've talked about, right? Which is this season of fatness, or at least it's a kind of a balance to the season that was the wilderness season where you were hungry, right? Satiety has come, but now you're complacent in it. You guys remember the drill here. But what you don't realize is there's still a self back here. Okay? And that self back there has not yet gone through the wilderness season. And so here's how I want you to think about it. The self that's back here in this place has yet to drop down into this mess, right? The self that's here has already gone through it. So what you don't know is that you could actually, if you were to say, meditate a little bit, potentially, I mean, there's a number of ways to access this, but meditation is one, hypnosis could be another. Why is this doing this? Blue. There we go. You could actually connect to the future self through that quantum principle. Now, what's interesting is the future self's already gone through this and knows now that they're satisfied, right? And so the concept is that the future self could tell this self, you're gonna be okay, right? You're gonna get through it. It's gonna suck, but you're gonna get through it. In fact, it might be even easier to get through it if you knew that the satisfaction was on the other side, right? Now, let's say that there's also a self here at Tabernacles. And that self at Tabernacles now knows what the last feast day season looked like in its entirety, right? Oh, but this is where it gets interesting. This self could potentially affect this self just like they can affect the one in the past. Now, the key to this is going to have to do with something called concealment, which we're going to get to in a minute. But the principle is that the Pentecost self or the golden calf self is going to be affected by the Passover self, because the Passover self sees themselves going into the wilderness and begins to have the anticipation that they actually won't make it. So here's the interesting thing about it. The Passover self makes the decision, because they've gone through the wilderness season before, that they just don't want to do it this year. They don't feel like they can get through it. They don't want to have that hunger. They don't like the frustration and whatnot. And so what happens? They will do two things. First, and let me see, how am I going to illustrate this? I'll bet you I could probably use black. They will block information from the future, letting them know that they can get through it. Now, let me tell you what is going to happen to this one at the golden calf season. Their heart will be very, very different in this process. Let's illustrate why. Let's go ahead and work this out. So now their heart did not listen to their future self, right? And so as a result of that, there is now a breach within their heart because of the blocking of this here. But what you're going to learn is what this has to do with is a combination that is a perfect storm of problems. So by the time we get to Pentecost, I mean, we're just an absolute mess. Okay. Now, one of the more important things that I want you to think about is what this is actually meaning in the grand scheme of things. First and foremost, who is listening at all times to the desires of your heart? Now remember, this principle right here, let me go ahead and illustrate this with some yellow. This principle right here is the result of this principle right here. Your future is actually being dictated by your anticipation heading to that direction. You've closed off from the quantum connection of your future self and your current self in superposition. You've closed off the information where you're actually going to be okay. You've blocked that because you don't want to go through it. You're like, I just can't do it this year. I'm not going to do this whole hunger thing. Now, let me just remind you really quick of the hunger thing, because I think it's very possible for people to have forgotten the truth behind the wilderness season. And as a result of that, I think it is very important that in that process, we remind you. So, going over to Deuteronomy chapter 8, we get our information. That's Joshua, not Deuteronomy. Joshua. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 8, and very importantly, verse 3. He humbled you and let you be hungry and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand. Remember what the understanding is, the what and the why? Understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. Well, there's a couple things we need to get into here, right? Okay, so the first one that we need to get into, and the first piece of information that is extremely important and relevant, is this. the intensification of all power in the universe, nor the understanding and wisdom that is stuffed into the what, the why, the who, and the how, which is Yahweh. Not even in Yahweh is there a mouth. So you need to understand that the concept of a mouth is the idea of a perceived origin of something. But remember, energy can be neither created nor destroyed. There's source of energy. We know that, right? Whether it be potential or kinetic, there's sourced energy. You wind up a clock and hold the key and don't let it turn, it will not tick. That's potential energy. But the moment you release it, it turns from potential into kinetic as that spring begins to unwind, right? As the clock continues to tick, eventually it will wear down and stop, which means what? It will be back at a state of potential energy when we wind it again. Now, there's all kinds of things we can get into about how it's converted to sound and friction and other energies, vibrational energies, etc. And that's why the clock, when it stops ticking, has not stopped in its energy. Energy has just been changed. Okay. But it's important for you to understand there is no mouth. There's no anthropomorphical attributes of the intensification of all power in the universe, nor of the self of it that is perceivable. Now, the way I want you to think about Yahweh is that Yahweh is the absolute most possible, maximum perceivable God that we can fathom. Beyond that is the actual intensification of all power in the universe, which we can't fathom. So he has to go through a series of changes in representation for us to be able to connect. Okay? And so when I say the intensification of all power in the universe, it's synonymous with Yahweh, but not in the way that you would think. So I'm not like coming up with a bunch of different gods here. What I'm doing is I am showing you where your mind stops is where Yahweh begins. Okay? Now, the next piece of process that we need to discuss is the concept of imagination. Okay? So there's a number of ways that we could get into this, but what I want you to understand is that when you have let's go back to the board here real quick. Okay? When you have this principle of a future self versus a past self and a present self, now you will understand. Okay? So let's say that you are the self at the golden calf season. If you're the self at the golden calf season, you look back to Passover and think to yourself, that really sucked. I hated going through that. It was a miserable time. I do not want to go through that again. That was just not fun, etc., etc., right? Not realizing that there's always a counter, or what we would call a correction present. And I'll explain that here in this way. We will go ahead and use well, let's just go ahead and use the blue like we usually do to represent the spiritual incline and climax and decline, and then the return to the fall feasts, right? Okay, and so the principle is that if you are entering the Omer and you're entering Passover with the belief that you are coming here, right? And that you're not coming here, then when you enter Pentecost, you will be this, right? And you won't be this, right? But the principle is that the reason why the future self is affected that way is because the future self is receiving information from Passover that says that the feast days are going to suck this year because you're thinking it. Okay, so you notice this isn't about speaking it into existence, but instead cutting off information from the future that could benefit you, like, say, the score of a baseball game that you actually bet on and lost on because you blocked the future self that could have told you which numbers to pick. Okay, I won't get into that. But the principle is that basically you are blocking the information that says that. So the way that I want you to think about this is this concept that you go into the wilderness season and you experience this really difficult decline in comfort. But truth be told is that you will never actually experience a greater high in your information system than this point right here in the feast day cycle. It is at the beginning. It is very close to Passover. In fact, it is the climax of the light of Passover, whereas this is going to be basically the decrescendo of the light of Passover, which consequently also happens to be the golden calf season, in which we become complacent. It is not a hungry people who forget their God, but it is a fattened people. Okay, so now when we are working with this system, now we start to understand that it is about the thoughts of the future, whether that be an openness to the quantum self that's in the future that can give us the information to overcome the thing, or yet to what? To see or observe ourselves in the future in a certain state. Now, here's where it gets crazy. Scientists have discovered that the time and the moment when this information is the most effective is in a tranced state. If you go back and you read some of the CIA, the declassified CIA information concerning, say, maybe the Monroe Institute, maybe MK Ultra, remote viewing, and a number of other things where they were working with extrasensory perception and LSD, and also with certain psylli or certain mushrooms, then you will find that they had some pretty hardline, concrete conclusions, and that when we look at the grand scheme of things, we need to start respecting the science that's already there. That, truthfully, I mean, I will tell you right now, when things like that come out, guess what happens in the world? Catastrophe that would distract you from the document that's being declassified. Do not think that I'm lying to you about that. You can actually verify that. Go to the times when crazy things have happened in the news and then go check the declassified documents. It will shock you how much they're together. All right. Now, having said that, I know that's kind of accusing people of trying to mastermind and manipulate your minds, but I'm going to teach you how to overcome that today. Okay. So the principle is now what's happening is you are in a trance-like state. Trance 1 or 2 is fine, but the principle is that you've dropped into a subconscious state. So let's talk a minute about that. What causes that? Number one, what causes that is redundance, okay? Redundance will cause your mind to drop out of consciousness and into subconsciousness or unconsciousness, even at levels where you are still consciously aware of your reality. Okay. Now, in the Bible, this is called the Neum, and according to the lexicons, it's where God speaks to his prophets. In fact, it is very much an understood thing within Judaism that your trance states are actually when you are going to be in connection with the light of the Creator more than not. Okay. Anyways, repetition bores the conscience and the subconscious starts to pay attention or handle its business. What do I mean by that? Let's say that you are driving to work and all of a sudden you're at work and you have no idea how you got there. That's trance. Now, what you need to be concerned about is that that's a disassociation from your five senses. Okay? the thoughts that you were having as you were traveling to work came without you really knowing that they came. And a lot of times you can't remember what you were thinking about when you get to work. You're like, okay, I'm here. Oh, wait a minute. How in the world did I get here? I didn't even remember. Was there stoplights? Did I run a stoplight? I mean, there's thoughts of mine in my mind, like, I'm a man, did I get in an accident? Because that's scary. I can't think of where, I can't remember how I got here. Well, what's interesting is in all that whole process is trance. And anybody who is a strong hypnosis practitioner or a hypnotherapist will have the ability to say, you know what, that's trance state. And you're extremely suggestible at those moments. Ooh, suggestible. That's a scary thing right there. Suggestibility is basically where your mind can absorb information that would give you a willingness to adjust your behavior, adjust your thinking, adjust your emotions without you really realizing that you're doing it because it was suggestive while you were hypnotized. Now, where this becomes important is in the imagination of the future. So there's two things that are happening here. Number one is that you're in a trance-like state. Second is that you're trying to what? You're trying to tap into the quantum information. That quantum information that you're tapping into is the future self, or you're doing something different, which is you're blocking that information. Which means what? It's a one-way line. Let me illustrate for you really quick, okay? And this is going to be important. So if I have a self here on the timeline, okay, and I have a self here on the timeline, and there is a connection between the two. Let me see. I'm going to just do this way. And then, yeah, we'll just do this way. Okay. And the principle is that, let me go ahead and get this in here real quick. That is actually bidirectional. In other words, you can send information up and you can receive information back. That's what quantum mechanics has taught us. Now, where this becomes important, and I'll get back to this illustration in a minute, where this becomes important is in the concept that if you're going to create a blockage and don't actually want to know about the future, something very interesting happens. You cut off that information from the future that gives you the information of how to get through the thing that you're going through right now. Remember my easy button, right? Let's take a look at my easy button. Let's just go and find out what is Rabbi Keenan Tavnu's easy button. Well, it's actually 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. I love it in the NASB because it really kind of gives you that word pertaining. Now, there's a number of ways in which it could be read in terms of what that word, that Greek word, could actually be interpreted as, but I love the NASB version. Seeing that his divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness through the true knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. Now, it is very important for you to understand what I just read. You already have it. Let me tell you what happens. You go through a circumstance by which you say maybe have a temper because you were being impatient with somebody, right? And now that relationship is kind of on the rocks. And now the person is like, I don't really want to be around this person anymore. And the other person is like, I've been pretty horrible to this person. Or perhaps maybe they feel justified. You entitled folks, I have a tendency to justify what you've done. But the principle is now you're like, okay, yeah, I want to change. Okay, so then you're like, let me go ahead and take a knee. And you say, Jesus, I need more patience. Now, what does the pulpit say? The pulpit says, oh, yeah, you pray for patience. You're going to be given plenty of opportunities to be patient. Well, that's somewhat true. But what you don't realize is you already have patience. The reason we know this is because the truth be told is the future self's already gone through it. And that information is being communicated back. Now you say, how could this retrospective information be working with us? Well, truth be told, is that information that you need in order to have life and godliness has already been given through the divine power. Wow. Omnipresent energy has already the information in it that we need in order to do the things because of our quantum connection to our superpositioned selves. Oh, this gets big because now guess what happens? First of all, and this is important, imagination by itself doesn't necessarily equate to what I'm talking about when it comes to dominion. Imagination in itself is actually ineffective. Where imagination becomes powerful is when it becomes suggestion in a hypnotic state. Oh, but now, see, this is the part that is going to become really uncomfortable. Let's talk a minute about animal instinct, okay? So first of all, let's talk about what they are. There's three, okay? There is a preservation of self, there is a herd or a connection, and it doesn't matter which animal you look at, there's always going to be connection, not necessarily herd, okay? Because there's flock and I mean, like ants have their own version of connection that isn't really herd instinct. But let's just talk about mammals because that's what we are. And then, of course, there's reproduction. So what are the three instincts? To preserve the species, to preserve self, and to connect. Now, connection is a part of preservation. So really, ultimately, at the height of all of this is preservation. Okay? Self-preservation, community preservation, and, of course, legacy preservation. Okay, so when we're talking about legacy, we're talking about reproduction, we're talking about making another version of the species in order to have the species continue to the next generation and preserving that next generation long enough for them to become the herd, right? Okay, so there's a number of things that are really important here. And here's the first one, and this is extremely important. When a herd perceives that preservation is not going to occur, the herd will move. Okay? A herd will not stay in one place if they perceive that preservation is not going to occur. Okay? And now where this becomes really important is when we start to get into the pheromone release when it comes to fear. Now, let's explain what I mean here. In a herd, let's say a herd of cattle, if one of the cattle spooks and releases that pheromone of fear, the rest of the cattle don't respond because they themselves see the danger. They respond to the pheromone. In fact, this is actually proven. You can look this up, fact check me. Pheromones in prey are stronger scented and stronger detected by prey than they are by the predator. Predators can smell fear, yes, but guess who can smell it better? The ones who are afraid. Now, here's the intrigue. If you get a group of cattle running, they will lose perspective on all the other values. For example, the preservation of the species that keeps them alive, humans, no longer become relevant to the equation. They will trample a human even though a human is who keeps them alive. There are no wild cattle anymore. Okay? And so the principle is, and if there are wild cattle, I don't know of them, When we get to a cliff, we keep running because we do not understand that we need to stop to preserve the species. In other words, cattle will run off of a cliff. We know this. Anybody who's driven cattle know that they will just go, right? If they get to running. But how does the stampede actually activate? One of the cattle begins to run, releases the pheromones, and the rest of the cattle go. They don't have to see the predator. They don't have to sense the danger. And it's true of deer. It's true of sheep. It's true of goats. It's true of dogs. It's all of the different species have this concept that the other one does not have to detect the threat. They just have to know that there's a threat present through the release of the pheromones. Meaning what? A herd will run off a cliff. A herd will run straight through a group of humans. A herd will trample each other. In fact, one of the craziest videos I ever watched was a video where a buffalo was running from a wolf, and another buffalo who was behind the wolf and the buffalo ran right over and through that other buffalo, literally causing that other buffalo to stumble, and the wolves got him. That is a concept of fear activating a collective conscience of individuals to move in a certain direction. Understand? So now when we get into the concept that the pheromone is actually a chemical detection within the herd that is present at the moment, how much more the quantum superposition selves. Now, I do not believe, because of the double slit experiment, that the quantum superposition self is a actual conscious process within animals. But what's interesting is they've detected it in trees. They've figured out that their entire forests are actually a corporate collective conscience, that they know if there's a fire in this part of the forest and there's no root connection, we're not talking about aspens here, there's no root connection between the trees that are on the other side of the forest, the trees on the other side of the forest will begin to excrete a lot of sap and a lot of stuff in order to prepare for the fire to prevent the fire from burning. And so the concept is that obviously sap isn't necessarily going to train them or save them, because that's one of the things that burns. But the premise is that they do something to try to preserve. Okay. So what we understand from that then is the concept of preservation through this idea. Now, where this gets crazy is when you realize that an imagination is actually always going to be about the future. When you imagine something, whether it be a solution to a problem, for example, you have you have a pack of Legos and you're supposed to come up with this picture, you imagine how to put them together, right? That's a future thing. So here's the intrigue. First of all, and this is important, in order for fear to activate, fear in and of itself has to block the future information. In other words, any information that would be coming to your imagination that would give you an opportunity to understand how to get through the thing that you're getting through right now is blocked. The second thing that happens, though, is now you imagine the future in a scary manner. What do? You disassociate from it. You don't know that you do, but you don't like the emotion, and therefore you drop out of reality because it's uncomfortable and there's that discomfort. And what you don't know is in that moment, you actually can't hear the person who you're in the conversation with. You actually can't think about the things that were important the moment before the fear came. And here's the intrigue. You can't do anything other than send information up the line. Which means what? Future self actually is getting the information, and therefore it's going through what you imagined. Now, like I said, the trance-like state is the process that gives the suggestions, right? And so now your imagination that has an emotional attachment to it now becomes what? Your future. So it isn't really necessarily about attraction as much as it is this quantum communication. But then we get into the realm of the universe being obedient, and it is referencing all of the selves superimposed and their wills. And now you can see where this creates years of problems because it's going to check every self in the future. Now, what's interesting about this, if we go back to our board really quick and we get into this concept here, in the use of neuro-linguistic programming or NLP, and also through hypnosis, we can actually let's say that the fear is happening. By the way, this is kind of like timeline therapy here, but let's say that this is the fear right here. Okay, I don't know why I'm having such a problem with my colors today. This is the fear right here, okay? And so we're going to go ahead and label that really quick, the fear, okay? So the self that's present in this moment right here, oh my gosh, okay, there we go. The self that's present here in this moment is still present with the fear, okay? But if we were to look past that moment of fear to the moment when the person has already gone through the experience, so I'm just going to put that in blue right here. So this is post-experience. And we go ahead and we accept the information from that future moment. Where is the fear? In other words, if we don't look here, but we look here, there is no fear. Let me illustrate this for you, okay? Let's say that you are afraid of something like, say, getting robbed, okay? So now you're running a convenience store and you have this fear of being robbed. And all of a sudden, a person comes in, puts a gun in your face and says, I want all your money. So you instinctually, as self-preservation, go and you get the money and you start pulling it out of the cash register like your boss taught you to do, and you hand them the money. Now, in that, you had a fear of being robbed. Now, we're not going to get into the idea that you attract it. We're just going to go with, it's a scary thing. It's midnight. It's dark. The only thing that's open is the store and the type of people that come in at night. Oh, my goodness. And so anyways, here comes this guy, puts the gun in your face, takes the money, and now he leaves. And what's going on? You're still afraid. You are still terrified of being robbed. You've already been robbed, and yet you're still terrified. You can't let go of the idea that you've been robbed. You're afraid that you've been robbed. Does that sound off the wall or what? It's already happened. Okay, now when you're going through it, it's scary. You got a gun in your face. Preservation of self kicks in. Okay, let me get that money for you. Have a good day. Can I get you a candy bar? You know what? Let me drive the car for you, right? But the moment that you get to the other side, why is that still present? The reason that's still present is because you're afraid of being robbed, even though you've been robbed. Now, the intrigue behind this is since you've already been through it, There's a point in time, the police show up and your family shows up and everybody's calm and everything's okay. And maybe there's a couple nights you can't sleep, but truth be told, there's a point in time where you get back to your sleep, you get back to everything. That's the future self who can now communicate to the present self. You'll get through it, right? But that fear blocks that information. Why? Because the idea of imagining that it would be okay to go through it would require you to, number one, trust something, and furthermore would require you to believe something, which means you would need to imagine something in a trance-like state. So what happens here? We have an imagination about the future. It may or may not happen, but truth be told is that most likely it is going to happen because you are in a trance-like state, disassociating from your five senses, right? Disconnecting from sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell, disconnected from that sixth sense, which is your intuition. And now what happens? Blocking off the information from the future and sending information up the future. And so the future self acts out the process. But again, if we go back to the timeline, what do we have? We have this idea that there actually is no fear. So this is you back in your bed. It's been a couple days. You're night-night, right? And so what happens? There is this principle that if you would listen to this self, what's happening? They are chilling. And if you would listen, you would have that same calmness in that process. But instead, what you do is you come along and you block it, right? You block it, and then you do something worse. You send information up the line that that's your future. And so this future self right here obeys that, because this is the instance right here. This is the instance of the moment, right? Now, in NLP, one of the things that we do is we reference the future self, get its emotions and its reality, and then we realize that that actually is our reality now, right? That's the principle. So how does this work? The way this works is that you are actually dictating your future by responding to your fears. Because what's happening is you are taking the moment to meditate upon it. You have to be in a trance-like state, meditate upon it. Now comes the quantum information, or the rule in quantum, that says that all information is already present in all places all at once. That connects with this verse. Seeing that his divine power, what's that word? Dunamis. Dunamis. Okay? Seeing that his divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness. The source energy has already granted to us everything that pertains to life and godliness, but he also told the universe to be obedient to the sons of Adam. Like I said, this is the last Dominion teaching I will do, because you now understand that there are three elements present in this. Number one is the quantum connection between every superpositioned self. Okay? Number two is the universe's obedience to all of them as a corporate collective consciousness of you dictating to the universe how you want your life to go, how you want your story to go, how you want your future to be. Okay. And then in addition to that, there is the element of you being in a state of blockage. Now, here's the intrigue. The only thing that is actually occurring when your ego does this thing is a concealment. In fact, truth be told, is the ego itself is the concealment of the divine self. You don't know that you are actually just an extension of the intensification of all power in the universe, and that it's really a matter of contractions that have caused you to be so weak in your power. And the truth be told is that we are in a very corrupted state, as it were, because we're in the 99% darkness, 1% light area, and we are the 1% light. And the concealment is actually our ego. So here's the interesting thing about it. If you block and prevent the light from the future to communicate to you in the past, because how many of you say, if I had a time machine, I would go back and I would tell myself not to do that thing? What if you could? Well, according to quantum mechanics, you can. And according to quantum mechanics, that's light. And according to quantum mechanics, you could actually go back and affect change in such a way that your future changes, even your now, right now, if you really were able to do it. Now, there's a reason why this is important, because dominion is only one of the commandments. Dominion is what told the universe, this guy's the boss. Adam and his children are your boss. And you will be obedient to them no matter what they do, no matter what they believe. You know what's beautiful is an atheist who goes through his life believing that none of this of what I'm saying is true and has all kinds of explanations on why the double slit experiment works the way it does. The universe doesn't care. His body doesn't care. Do you realize that his body, even though that he doesn't believe, is responding in a Fibonacci state of the bending and the manipulation of light to the universe's promptings as a result of the whole self, of the self from beginning to end, of the self that has dictated the quantum changes. So our ego blocks the light. Our ego actually prevents the information that we need from the future to us. Why? Because in the end, what's crazy about it is all that the ego wants to do is preserve. And here's the interesting thing about it. In that process of preserving, what it wants to do is make sure that it is the one in control. Watch this verse. I'm going to read this verse different than you've ever heard it before. Okay? This is in Proverbs chapter 3. My son, do not regret my teaching, right? Or law, Torah. Do not regret my Torah. Let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Okay, that's all fine and dandy, but look at this. Do not let kindness and truth leave you. We're going to get to that in a second. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good repute in the sight of God and man. Ooh, that gets interesting, right? Now we're talking about some co-authorship and some other things going on. But then look at 5. Trust in the source of all energy that is intensifying with all of the being who listens. And do not create a blockage of that information so that you dwell upon the idea that you are the what and the why. In all your ways, make sure that you keep that channel open, and then the process or the prescribed path that you move through will be straight. Do not think about the who and how as if it was yourself, but give honor and therefore respect the source and turn away from the twisted mind. It will be the healing to your body. In other words, it will be the restructuring of your DNA and the body's information of homeostasis, and a refreshment to the very marrow of your bones, which feeds the entire existence of your body. Sit at the table as the inheritor of the source from your abundance of energy and manifest material goods, and from the first of all that you create, so that the storehouses of that energy will be to the full, and you then can give that energy out. Look at this. And that the things that hold that which flows will overflow with the new existence of that fluid. Do not reject the information from the future that the source has sent, and do not resent the wilderness season. Do not resent the feast day season, for that matter. For who the source of all energy that is intensifying sends forth as a benevolence, he also creates the correction of the malevolence, even as a origin of a species creates a system of safety for its offspring, who it is bonded to. Why did I read it that way? Because you can take as much as you want of anthropomorphic information and stuff it into your system and work that system. He's a father, fine, we'll work with father. He's a husband, fine, we'll work with husband. He's a king who leads warriors, fine, we'll work with that system. But truth be told, it's all energy. And truth be told is that you are a manifestation of the corruption of the light. But you are the light. And so what's corrupting you? Your ego. Now, having said that, you need to understand that's also what's preventing you from knowing the higher selves. Why? Because there's a point in time in your future where you elevate so high that you go up to that spot where Paul went, or where Christ went, or where Elijah went. That future self, if you were able to establish a line with him or her, oh my goodness, that's a very different experience, isn't it? But what you need to know is that the prophets, one of the things that made them a prophet, remember, there was a school of prophets, and what people don't know, and this is in all the ancient cultures, is that when somebody was neurodivergent, they were sent to prophet school. They were considered the seers. They were considered the Samuels. They were considered the Nathans. They were considered the Elishas and Elijahs. They were considered the Moshes, the Aharons and the Miriams. They were considered prophets, and therefore they were sent to school to learn how to better channel that Na'um experience between Yahweh, which is the higher self, and themselves in the present. You want to know why Elijah was able to go up in his single lifetime? Because he tapped in to Yahweh on a whole nother level. He tapped in to the voice, and he did it at the cave. You can go back and read how there was thunder and there was lightning and there was a whirlwind. All of those things, the God that we can perceive has used as a way to speak to Job, to the people at Sinai, etc. But with him, it was the kol, the bat kol, the inner voice, the silent whisper. That inner voice is received as a result of opening yourself up to all the information. And let me tell you why you don't. Let me tell you the truth why the pulpit says, don't open yourself up. You open that up to demons. Oh, yeah, you know what? Let me tell you why you would open that up to demons is because you created those demons in the first place as a result of limiting beliefs, as a result of entitlements, as a result of wounds, because you believed lies and you created a Torah on those lies. And truth be told is those other commandments that you've added to your life are actually going to be the places in which your ego is going to just prosper because you've created your own Torah. But here's the crazy part about it. You are more capable right now because of the world you dwell in of tapping into fear and making it happen inadvertently as a result of your ability to cast with your mouth and to demonstrate through intention micro adjustments in your life because of the fear to the universe that that's actually what you want, then you are of prospering with your mind. Because we have forgotten. You know why we can't find evidence of silicone and microchips? It's not because they broke down or were burned or destroyed. You know why Solomon didn't use them? He didn't need them. Let me tell you how it worked. He tapped in to the cellular network of Yahweh. He tapped in to the cell phone towers around him, the other humans. And he tapped into the understanding and wisdom of the what and why, the who and the how, not the when and the where. Superposition is where. Each individual on that supervision is when. Irrelevant. Your current time and moment is irrelevant to your past and your future, except that right now, under the right circumstances, you can contact your past if that one would allow you and let you know that you're going to be okay. I speak from experience. I know I've done it, and that healing changed a lot for me. Going and referencing the future self, you can experience now the moment when you actually were successful, were prosperous, were in a state of shalom. Past the moment of the fear. When you work with this correctly, you will understand that all dominion is a conglomerate of all the selves as a whole creating information. Why is this important? Because we know, in fact, I'm just going to go ahead and illustrate it really quick. I wasn't expecting to get into this today, but we'll go ahead and get into it. We know that if you have a let's see, let's use blue. Okay. We have a wave. What you don't know, or what you may know, is that if we were to add another wave that was just a little bit out of sync, the sum of all of the waves right here This sum is actually, this is important, a higher wave. Okay? But if you have a wave that is a lot of bit out of sync, let's say we go with, say, this much out of sync, the sum is a subtraction of the two, and therefore, however much is needed to cancels out, and the wave reconciles to here. Would you rather that you were here here, or would you rather that you were here? Well, part of that is going to have to do with how much information you're going to allow in. Remember, the pulpit's telling you don't open yourself. But the truth be told, that all that's really going to happen is whatever you allow to be your guilt. Remember this thing here. What if I told you that you can actually look into your past to that self who is here at the oops moment, okay? And so you can look into your past in that self right here, and that instance of mistake is here. No, actually, let's do it that way. Let's do it this way. That instance is here, and therefore you are carrying present tense guilt about what you've done, okay? But if you look 5 minutes into the past behind that moment before you made the mistake, in fact, let's stay consistent here. So you look past that moment and you look into this moment, and you have a self that is before that moment, before you committed the thing that has caused you the guilt. Guess what you're not going to find there? You're not going to find guilt because you haven't done it yet. You're going to find a clear conscience. So if you look past this moment, you will realize that you are actually not guilty. It is actually this one sending that information back that says you're guilty. Now, how all this works is beyond the realm of just science, but mysticism. Because truly, it's the Elohim in you that has the power to do this. That's why light is obedient to you. It's the Elohim in you, or in Adam. Let us make Adam in our likeness and in our image, and our likeness. That image of God is the Elohim. That likeness is the power. And here's a part that's important for you to know. People were shocked that Yeshua walked on water, stepped onto a boat, and controlled a storm. And he goes, "Why are you tripping? This is the easy stuff, man. Greater works than this shall you do." So people are tripping on how a woman with an issue of blood can come up to him, and she can reach out and touch his garment, and she can be healed. And that's the dunamis that went out of Yeshua. And he says, greater things than this will you do than controlling a storm. How much more the healing of a person? And when you look at Proverbs 3 in that context, what's really going on? You're not trusting the source. You want to be in control. That's all fear really is. It is a concealment of the trustworthiness of God. Let me repeat that. All the ego is a concealment of the trustworthiness of God. You refuse to listen to the self that's telling you that you can trust God. You refuse to listen to the self that already trusted God. Do you realize that? You don't even listen to the one who went through it and came out the other end. Now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I don't want to go through that again. Why not? Do you think you're going to be the same as you were when you tried it the first time? No. The first time you went through it, you experienced it, you now know those experiences. So the future part of you can tell that past part of you, you're going to be okay. And guess what? Your future will change. That your present will change. If you went back and told yourself you're going to be okay, then you will not be afraid to go through it again because you've already been okay. You've been on the corner asking for bread and have received bread. So why would you be afraid to sit on the corner? Because again, you assert the idea that you actually want to be in control of whether or not that happens again. Well, I got news for you. Because of all the other people that are making the decisions that they're making, and because of all the other prayers that are going on, you will pray. You will pray very much in doubt for something that you want. And your enemy is praying that you don't prosper in a state of the heat of passion. That prayer will be more effective than your prayer. In fact, I'm just going to tell you right now, fear and doubt are the concealments. Everything else is you and the light of the Creator. Fear and doubt are really the source of all ego. They're the source of every bad decision that is present in your reality. Fear is a lack of trust in the Creator to do or repeat the process it's already done. And not only that, but you have cut off the self that's trying to tell you that. And furthermore, and this is important, doubt is a disbelief in yourself, which means what? Fear is a disbelief in the Creator. Doubt is a disbelief that you are the Creator. What was the greatest sin in the garden? Do you know? Do you think it was the eating of the fruit? You're wrong. That part is really totally irrelevant. What's relevant is the doubt that Eve had in the first place. Now, we can get in all kinds of dynamics on why that doubt existed, but truth be told is she was already told that she was created in the image of God. So why would she want to be like God? The greatest sin in the garden was Eve doubting that she was the Creator. The second greatest sin in the garden was them believing that they could not trust God. That's why they sowed the fig leaves, right? That's why they tried to hide themselves. They were trying to control their environment. And truth be told, on a regular basis, I hear people say, I don't care what evidence you have in front of you, I believe this way, right? Now, there's exceptions to that because even Neville Goddard got into the idea that you can't trust your reality. But truth be told, you are actually controlling your reality. Universe is responding to you, and you are responding to some version of yourself. And that version of yourself just so happens to also be Yahweh concealed through fear and doubt. So when you are practicing this, because we've talked a lot about the problem here, and we've talked a lot about the, say, solution here. But truth be told is there has to be a practical application. So first and foremost is to be and remain as present as possible, to not allow without intention the disassociated state. Now, this can get scary, but one of your combative powers, one of your superpowers that you have is the word what if. And here's the crazy part about it. It is the counteraction. It is the inoculation of fear in the first place. So let's say you are a business owner and are afraid of financial woes. And you say, oh, you know what? If I don't make this quarterly earnings, we're probably going to have to close the business. And you start to feel that anxiety and fear and the buildup of adrenaline and all those things that are supposed to occur when your herd is running, not when you might have financial woes in the future and you don't even know if you're going to have financial woes. Because what happens when that client shows up and all of a sudden, boom, your business explodes and you don't have enough time to actually be worrying about financial woes. You never know. Tomorrow's not promised. In fact, it's one of the only promises that's not given. Okay? But here's the premise. Here's the concept. You ask the question, the scary question. You actually see the fire and throw gas on it. All right? If that's what I'm afraid of, what would actually happen? Ask yourself that. What would actually happen? You could ask the question, can I trust God? I don't know if I can. Okay, so maybe that's not that great of a question. Will you be okay? Well, you could get into your logic and say, well, I mean, even if I was on the streets, somebody would probably give me money. In fact, I probably might make any more money than I make now if I go out on the streets with a cardboard sign. I've gone through that logic before. But the premise is I would be okay. In fact, death really isn't all that bad of a thing. Being a quadriplegic, that might be a bummer, but truth be told, is that's probably not going to happen. Now, that may happen, but again, what if it does? What's going to actually happen to you? What will you feel? What you will experience? And what you're going to find is that if you look back on the instances that you've already gone through, or similar instances, you will realize that that element right there, that fear right there is going to cause you to make micro adjustments to compensate for that fear, and therefore you're communicating to the universe what you actually want. And not only that, but you're blocking your future self that's trying to tell you you'll get through it. So here's the intrigue. You come upon a fear and you just get right in the middle of it. You run out there with a sword into the battle line without anybody backing you, and you got a whole army in front of you because you're curious whether they're going to kill you or not. That's power. You actually going and saying, well, what if it did happen? Would I be okay? And you'll find that that fear will lose its power. Second thing that's most important about that is you can't disassociate. You have to get right in the middle of it, present with your conscious mind. If you disassociate from it, you're going to be suggestible, and that suggestion is going to come from the emotional attachment of the imagination of the future. So that's number one. When a fear comes, that's how you're going to deal with it. Because then you're going to communicate to the universe something very important. I don't believe that that's going to happen, but if it did, I would be okay. Number two, what you actually want, you need to go into a trance and meditate upon. You need to see yourself in the future accomplishing that thing. Yeshua said that if you want something, believe that you have received it and you will have it. Okay? Second piece of that puzzle is you need to realize that that choice, whether it be the first one, overcoming the fear by saying, what actually would happen? Let's go ahead and entertain it. Why are we scared of it? Just go through it. And then what I want to happen you will corporate collectively connect to every other piece of quantum energy in this universe and send out that information. And if enough of you do it, you will alter the course of humanity. Because right now, humanity is terrified of something, and truth be told, is that terror is actually ripping us apart. Do you know why you think you're in the end times? You know why you think that the end of the world is coming? Because you are afraid of it and you want it to. You want to get it over with like a spanking. Either you want to get it over with because you actually loathe yourself, and truth be told is if you loathe yourself, then you loathe those who you would love for that to fall upon. When it says love your neighbor as yourself, you know why you hate your neighbor? Because you hate yourself. And so what does that result in? That results in a corporate collective intent to destroy us all, to bring the apocalypse upon us. When truth be told, is if that we were in any state of love, beginning with ourselves, we would want this world to survive. We would want it to go on. We would just want to see change. In the end, that's all we actually want, is for the discomforts to go away and the comforts to come. And truth be told, is it's the ego alone that creates the policies and creates the superposition and creates the opportunities for destruction to come. I hate this stupid world. You know how many people say that? No wonder it's a stupid world. No wonder we hate it. Because truth be told, is it's just responding and doing exactly what it's told to do. If you say you hate it, then it's going to become a hated thing for you. If you say it's getting worse, then it's going to become a worse thing for you. It's being obedient to you. Because what you want is actually contained in what you meditate upon. Because that becomes the suggestibility. And if you've blocked the future, that's the information sent up the pipeline. So now you're sitting in this moment where you're not being successful in your business or in your family or in your fatherhood. I'm going to tell you right now, it started way back then when you imagined it. But what you need to understand is that future that you're creating is actually based upon a blocking of the future self because of superposition. We're talking about different dimensions of you where the right choice was made, trying to tell you the right choice, and you just don't listen. You got it all figured out because number one, you fear. You cannot trust that the creator has a plan and wants to co-authorship with you. And second, you doubt that you are the creator. So, why is this the last message on dominion that I will ever teach? Because there are other commandments within that verse that we need to get into. And truth be told, is dominion in and of itself is supposed to be old news by now. We're supposed to be in that realm and when I say supposed to be, what I mean is humanity has a tendency towards elevation. Remember, the intensification of all power in the universe has an insatiable, intensifying desire to give what? All of its benevolence to you. Which means what? Elevation. And that elevation is actually just a revealing of the concealments. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search it out. Only in your state of kingship in dominion can you search out the next thing. The next thing is coming. Because dominion should be old news. Now, does that mean all of a sudden you can just name it and claim it? If you're dumb enough after this teaching to buy into that junk still, you need to go back and listen again to the science behind what I've told you. You don't speak things into existence, they already exist. It's just a matter of whether it's concealed or not. And that's the crazy part about this whole thing. People get all scared. They're like, somebody be like, oh man, I'm going on this trip. I hope I don't die. And somebody's like, oh, don't say that. Whatever. That is the total opposite of the function of how this works. It is superpositioned and it already exists. The question is whether you want to tap into the negative version of it or you want to tap into the positive version of it. You want to tap into the apocalypse version of it or do you want to tap into the utopia version of it? It's up to you and him and her and them. It worked with the monkeys, so don't think it's not working with you. It works with the pills, so don't think it's not working with you. And it worked with the double slit experiment, so it probably is working with you. Obedience and the corporate collective conscience are the destruction or the elevation of this world. Get over it. There is no mechanism, there is no other thing that is outside of those rules and those procedures. That is how the intensification of all power in the universe has chosen to operate with you in that Kabbalistic state. You are the creator. And you are in a relationship, as in a superposition with the intensification of all power in the universe. And the only difference between you and it is what you don't know, the concealment. But it is the what and the why, the who and the how, and not the where and the when. In fact, the where and the when is totally irrelevant. It's the only thing where the where and the when is really relevant, truth be told, is in the court of law. That's it. Witnesses. Somebody bearing witness to somebody doing an action that violates Torah that is going to result in death. That's where the only place where it really becomes relevant. But if you could see beyond that, you could see the future self who's actually friends with your enemy. Well, that would blow your mind, wouldn't it? I have seen it happen in my life and in my lifetime. I have experienced the things that I'm talking to you about now, just on a very minuscule level compared to what we really need to be in. But part of that is going to come from the fact that this needs to be old news. So it's about to become old news in After His Heart Ministries. Shabbat Shalom.